On today's episode of The Uptake, hidden accessibility needs and unexpected benefits for all, in celebration of Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Lots to learn. You don't want to miss it. Welcome to The Uptake. This is a new show about all things tech and community. I'm your host, Anna Chu. I'll introduce you to people all over the world covering topics in the world of tech, as well as uncover personal stories of professional learning, development, and community building. We're going to discover and figure out together the answer to the question, what is community? In this podcast, we are connecting with you, people in the community. If you have ever helped someone with a question, learned something new, or shared something you discovered in the world of tech, well, guess what? You're actually part of a community. My hope is that through The Uptake, you will meet cool people in the community of tech, hear their stories, and get inspired to be part of a vast and expanding community in your area and beyond. In this episode, I'll be talking with our MVP friends, Andy Talbot and Bill Ayers. Bill is a Microsoft 365 solution architect and developer. He's also a Microsoft Certification Master, Office Development MVP, and Certified Trainer. Andy is a Microsoft 365 consultant and an MVP for Office apps and services. Firstly, I'd love to welcome my co-host for today's show is Andy. Hi, Andy. How you doing?
Hello, Anna. I'm doing very good, thank you. How about yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. I have a slightly different setting than my normal Uptake setting. I have just moved house and my belongings are just everywhere. So it was definitely a bit of a scramble.
It also looks like, are you sitting on a beach chair? I mean, we're talking about accessibility today, and I'm just checking that my eyesight is working here properly.
I had to find whatever piece of furniture would have worked today, but actually I don't have that much furniture, quite frankly. This is a director's chair that I've kind of converted. I did a little bit of a DIY job on it. I don't know if you remember Microsoft Ignite a couple of years ago. We had all these director's chairs in our podcast studio over there, so I just repurposed it.
I do remember it.
Yeah, so this is one of those.
Oh, very good. Very nice.
Yeah, Mary Jo may have sat in this very chair.
Well, one of the things I'm quite excited to talk about today is all around the accessibility. So I kind of started off with a bit of a joke there about, is my eyesight deceiving me? But when it comes to my day job as a Microsoft 365 consultant, accessibility is really, really big deal to me. I mean, it's something that I suffer from firsthand and I've experienced as part of my job over a number of years. So I guess one of the things that I'd like to open with really is my hidden disability. So many people look at me and they think Andy looks normal. I'm sure everyone agrees that, especially those that know me. But you know what? Even though I look normal, I have a impairment. So I'm I find it really difficult to hear properly in my left ear. So I was born stone deaf when I was 8. It was even worse. So I've had a number of years of corrective surgery. So for me, accessibility and technology, which didn't exist for so many years, is a really big deal. And I'm just so proud to see all the new features that Microsoft has started to unveil, because they're an absolute lifeline to me. All the things such as auto caption, the subtitles, even simple little things in Windows 10 where I can take the stereo off and I can have mono sound coming from both directions. They're really, really big deals to me. So I was highly interested to get involved in this conversation and especially hear the stories from Bill as well, who's at the very heart of developing solutions with accessibility, right at the core of the DNA of it.
Yeah, so why don't we bring Bill on to the show? Hey, good morning, Bill. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm very well, thank you. It's afternoon here, actually, Anna.
We are a very international podcast. No matter what time zone you're in, we say good day, good everything to you.
It's all good, yeah.
Yeah, so Andy definitely gave you a really good intro in terms of your entry point into the world of accessibility, and it really came down to customer feedback when you were developing product, right?
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
So, it was a long, long time ago, about 1995. before the internet was a thing, or before, that's not quite true, before the web, before the World Wide Web was a thing, and we used to write software for Windows 95 and Windows 98. And one of the things you could do with the Win32 API and all the SDKs is you could get quite sophisticated with make very nice user interfaces that people could adapt and change the font size. And, because it was technically possible to do that, of course we did. Why wouldn't you? But then we found that people were saying, my father's got dementia, but he can use this application because we can make the buttons bigger or make the display bigger, or his eyesight's failing, or there's somebody with some neurological condition is able to use it. They don't have very good control. So really by accident sort of discovered that we'd actually made an accessible product before that was really a thing, and before people were talking about it. Now, of course, it doesn't have to be an accident. There's lots of resources to help you build good products from an accessibility point of view, and tools to help you to do that. But we kind of fell into it by accident.
Yeah, but such a great way in starting too, because you had to really dig deep and find that empathetic muscle to think about the user experience from an accessibility point of view. And to Andy's point earlier, a lot of these things are just completely hidden until you think about a person who's got neuromuscular challenges or people with hearing impairments. You just don't think about it because when you're developing software, you're sometimes only developing from your own perspective, right?
Yes, and you have to sort of put yourself from the point of view of people who have a variety of accessibility needs, and the other thing is that you. As a young man developing software back in the day, you didn't have any particular needs, unlike Andy, but it was pretty easy, and I think that's what a lot of software developers do. We have often, working for Microsoft, you've probably got a perfect internet connection. I haven't, but a lot of people do, and so they expect it's going to be easy for everybody else using the software because they're not a typical user, and they have knowledge about what they're building, which perhaps a user doesn't have. But these problems aren't just for people who are registered disabled in some way, or this. Which is already a huge proportion of the population, as we discovered. There's I think it's some number like 1.2 billion people around the world have some identified disability that they're dealing with. But then there's all the people who are just they're like me. They need spectacles to read, reading glasses, because over time you lose that ability to accommodate, and that brings all sorts of problems which you don't really think of as an accessibility problem, perhaps, because it's such a commonplace thing. But it does affect everybody, and if you make your applications with tiny text, for example, and no way of making it larger, or if you give the user of your website no way of zooming the text without everything going haywire, then you're making it very difficult, not just for 15% of the population, but for about 50% of the population. And we're all going to be there sooner or later, unless we're very unlucky. We're all going to be in the same boat. So it's really almost everybody has some kind of accessibility need.
But what you said there really kind of like struck a chord with me. And it's something that I regularly bring up in client engagements. If it's not already being talked about, I try and put accessibility on the table quite early on. And then not with current clients, I love them all. In previous engagements, I have had it where people have said, well, why should it matter? They can call up someone. I mean, that's a big assumption that calling is not a problem. But I said, okay, well, we'll think about it this way. Of all the people in this room having this challenging conversation right now, when it shouldn't really be challenging, at least 1 in 5 of you statistically are going to develop an accessibility issue in the next 2-3 years. I said, so how do you feel about that now? And it really changed the course of the conversation. And I think the other part to it as well is companies need to work really hard to attract and retain talent. And part of that, at the crux of it all is the company values. And part of those values should be that I care about the team member, the employee. I provide the right tools, not just for them today, but as time develops and issues and accessibility things may come into play, there certainly will for some of them, I accommodate and think about that, and I make you aware of it. If they're not there, I give you a channel to feedback and ask. Because here's another thing that's really key about it. A lot of people, in my experience, will not openly put their hand up and say, hey, I've got this accessibility issue. That doesn't mean there shouldn't be a way of them to communicate back, though, is there? Because there's always room for improvement.
Yeah, and the resources are there. If you go looking for them, they're not difficult to find. There are plenty of... There's the Web Accessibility Initiative that the W3C do, for example. There's loads of resources on the Microsoft site where people have listed. Here's a checklist. The one that our UK government have actually. I think it's the Home Office have a set of posters which have a list of various accessibility needs and mitigations for them. So it's really easy now to get the information, and there's really no excuse for not building that into your products. And it also really, when you look at that advice, it really is just about writing good software and good websites. It's not just, most of these recommendations are about not writing software that's difficult to use for anybody. And it may be for somebody with a particular accessibility need, it's more difficult because for example, if you don't try and think of an example. If you use tiny text, it's really bad for somebody who's vision impaired or very poor text contrast, but it's also horrible for everybody else to use. So why would you do that anyway? And usually the reason is it's some sort of design ethos that they're going for, or they've been asked by somebody who doesn't really understand to write something that way. And so we have to, it's really a question of training people so that they know about these things and they can resist that and say, yeah, well, no, we don't want to make our text a slightly darker grey against a very slightly lighter grey background, because it's going to be unusable.
Yeah.
And Bill, like you said, there's a number of checkers available. I mean, you just need to go to microsoft.com/accessibility, and there's a plethora of tools that will help you through all of those different types of impairments and accessibility issues. One of the things I just wanted to kind of bring to the surface there, what I really like is we got into the weeds there around the development stuff and the concepts around, why accessibility matters when designing good, clean code that is accessible to all. If we think about it strategically, do we think there's a bit of a gap there at the whole about the way that it's being thought about or not thought about in programs of engagement with whether it's a Microsoft Office program or some other thing that's being developed?
I think it's really... when you think about it from a purely commercial point of view. So, I mean, on the one hand, it's a question of doing the right thing. It may even be a legal requirement. So in a lot of jurisdictions, there's legislation around that, and somebody can actually sue you if for not making it. And that's really like the last resort, I think. These are things that you should be doing anyway. But it just makes commercial sense because it's a significant proportion of the market that you're making your product difficult to use for. That just doesn't make sense commercially. So even if you can't, if the the appeal to just being the right thing to do doesn't work. You can also always, I think, argue that just from a commercial point of view, it just doesn't make sense not to consider these things and do these things properly. And then finally, if that isn't a convincing argument, you could sort of bring up the legal stick as well as another justification that there's a legal risk if we don't do this right.
Of course. I mean, one of the things I think about on this is early on in any type of program, and when I say program, I mean a set of work rather than application, is to bring people like the HR and the talent team on board into that. So there's a number of different roles they can play, but predominantly for me, if we think about accessibility, it's building in what we're trying to achieve. Does that align to our values here and going at that angle? Now, if we think about that's one of the things we mentioned earlier on in the conversation, we said, how do we keep that continual improvement? Well, I guess there's two parts. There's the continual improvement, and there's also identifying that we're still doing the right thing for people. And this is where typically what I've tried to build into my programs of work, yes, they are mainly around Microsoft 365 product stack, quite proudly so, is to try and build in an accessibility champion network. And the thing I like about this is it doesn't have to be a full-time job. I mean, it can, and it is for a number of large organizations, but it can be a role that's assumed part-time people. Even I know folks that use, let's say, half an hour at their lunchtime here and there to communicate through perhaps a SharePoint communication site to people saying this is the latest things around accessibility. Did you know there's a growing trend of this particular type of issue, or did you know about these new features and product set? And that's something that's really important, because when I speak to people, product owners of Office 365 products, I say to them, if you keep your eye on the roadmap, it's not just useful for knowing what's coming and what's changing, but you can pay particular attention to the accessibility features. And therefore, you have an incredibly powerful story for a number of people to replay quite regularly, saying, hey, guys, with this continual improvement in mind and aligned with our ethos, our family and cultural values, here are the latest accessibility features we're making available to you. They don't really care so much about it keeping them secure. They care about what's in it for me and reflecting the company culture.
I think that's a really, really interesting point, and I'd really love to dig deeper into that, because I think it's as best practice really in terms of advocating for accessibility, having someone internal to the organization being that champion, because ultimately people who do have specific needs from an accessibility point of view, they don't tend to complain. That's probably what they've been doing their entire lives, just been coping and finding different mechanisms and workarounds to just stay productive and stay a functioning member of their community or society.
Yeah. And one of the things I've actually found off the back of that, you're quite right, Anna. Again, I'm speaking from my own personal experience here. There are many people who just haven't said, and it's been accidentally discovered. Of course, I'm not going to be given HR records, nor would I expect to open up and start to look for people with issues, whether registered or not. But here's how I have very commonly found it. When I've been presenting in PowerPoint, and hey, who doesn't present in PowerPoint in our line of work? And I'm sure everyone in the community is living in PowerPoint at least once a week. But when you're speaking to people, just hit that subtitle button, because what I found that's quite amazing about that is not just the fact people are amazed it's there, but the fact that a number of people have gone, that's actually really useful for me because I struggle to hear. Or perhaps, and here's another way of looking at it, English isn't my first language.
Yes.
So I find it quicker to see it in text and understand it than it does to process it through hearing.
Yeah, but it's not just people who have accessibility needs aren't always, it's not something wrong with them. It might be that they're in a noisy environment, or they're temporarily impaired somehow. They've got a wrist injury through RSI, or they've got some other injury. So and that's sometimes people probably don't then think, why aren't these things working for me? I mean, a lot of people, it's not in everybody's nature to ask for help as well. So the support should be there. You shouldn't need to ask for help.
Yeah, and I think, many of our listeners, they, either work in IT, some of them might be in management themselves. I think we really need to see that a lot of this endorsement, a lot of the awareness of accessibility needs to come from, or needs to have some executive support. Otherwise, it makes it very difficult to create an environment where accessibility is seen as not only a business critical issue, but a way of being more inclusive and ultimately being better for business. Let me start with Andy. Have you seen any good examples of how management have actually really driven accessibility as a core priority?
Yeah, sure. Again, I think the struggle over the years has been that the technology hasn't really been there. I mean, obviously, I'm biased towards Microsoft. It's my bread and butter, and I love it. I genuinely believe in the blue badge. I do. But here's the thing. Microsoft themselves, over the last 2-3 years especially, have accelerated so much in making the tools more accessible. But not just that, actually saying these are the accessibility challenges that we regularly see. This is what we're developing solutions against. That's made my conversations with people at the exec level much easier to have, because we can then put that on the table and go, hey, accessibility isn't a high cost thing anymore. We don't necessarily have to hire Bill to spend a year trying to rewrite this thing to make it accessible. He can be doing much more valuable things. Of course, wouldn't you agree, Bill?
Well, new technologies like AI are making this a lot easier as well. So there's, you mentioned the speech to text, which is surprisingly good now. I mean, it's not 100% accurate, but neither is a human translator. So it's surprisingly good. It's good enough, to be usable, which you couldn't have said 5 years ago. And so a lot of these technologies have really improved because of that. The narrator, which is a feature in Windows, which is a screen reader. I know a lot of people who have low vision or vision impaired will use the JAWS commercial screen reader.
Yes.
But actually, what's built into Windows is pretty good now, and it's something that everybody's got. So if you want to see what it's like to try and use a website using a screen reader, you can, because you can switch on narrator, crank it up to about 70% speed, and you will then know what it's like to try and work your way around a website. And then suddenly, if you didn't already understand, you'll see why it's so important to make a website, for example, have a logical structure, that you don't rely on things like images with wording in, and that there's the suitable alt text to assist, and there are navigation aids. And if you can't get your website a logical layout, you can use tools like Aria, for example, to sort of just give that extra clue to the screen reader, which sees a web page in a completely different way to the visual rendering of a web page.
So just want to hit on the screen reading thing there, Bill, briefly. So you talked about artificial intelligence playing a big part in this, and I couldn't agree more, because when you import images now into an Office 365 desktop application or into a SharePoint news page, perhaps, you notice we're getting that alt text automatically populated. So AI will say, man with a yellow umbrella or something like that. So there really is a low-cost entry point to being more accessible than ever before.
Yes, it's a sort of a better than nothing alt tag. Much better if you can design your own alt tag that really describes the intent of that image. But it's better than nothing, and it's a miracle really, which would have seemed absolutely impossible about 5 or 10 years ago, that it would be accurate enough to be useful. So yes, that's an example of something that can the technology has improved to the point where we can, by default, get a much better experience for people. But you have to, enable these things and know about them and make them available.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Bill, I want to ask you a particular question about when you work with clients, when you work with their management, how they're probably coming to you with a very specific challenge, but have you found yourself in a situation where you've really had to angle for accessibility, and they can and you've managed to convince them that this was something that it was worth investing?
Sometimes, yes. Not everybody gets it, and sometimes, as I say, you do have to remind them that there is a legal obligation in a lot of cases, and that or at least position it as a risk factor if you don't follow these. But the vast majority of people, I think, are starting to get it now, and you just need to explain that it doesn't have to be particularly expensive either. And that it does really, at the end of it, boil down to good web design or good product design to build things this way, and to build this build applications that are accessible from the outset and not some sort of bolt-on that we add later when we've finished building what we wanted to build and we've satisfied all our requirements, and then add something later, which is a lot more difficult to do. It's something that should be part of the whole design process and the thinking behind product development.
Yeah,
there's something I want to add to that, if I may. So when we talk about how do we get it on the table and keep it relevant, I've had it sometimes where it stayed on the table for a year and it was relevant for a year and then it disappeared off the table. It wasn't really thought about. It was done, closed, onto the next thing. But this isn't onto the next thing. This is continual. And so I just want to add like a tip that I found really useful for a number of organizations, helping them out. And that's to say, if you don't think you have an accessibility issue with people and technology providing, or you want to gauge where you're at with that, it's very common for a number of companies to have an annual employee survey. So why don't you incorporate the accessibility questions into that? It doesn't cost you anything to ask those questions. And it could add so much value when you start to see those results coming in. And you have an annual gauge every single year, don't you, at that point?
Yes.
Great idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I really love that. And I loved what you said earlier too, that it's not a bolt-on thing, and it also isn't something that you should just do once and then move on to the next thing. Kind of in a similar way to security, right? Like if you're not vigilant about accessibility, then you're going to leave people behind. You are going to be excluding people from being able to use your product or being able to develop on top of it. So I thought that was a really good way of thinking about that. This needs to be something that is a constant priority, but it also shouldn't feel like you have to, it just makes business sense, like you said earlier. It's not something like, it may feel like a cost, but it really is an investment in inventing, in creating better product.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So, gosh, like we've talked a lot about, a number of different things. Let's talk about some of the fun sort of features that you've seen Microsoft release that are very specific to accessibility. We mentioned, things like JAWS screen readers and Windows 10 have really made some significant improvements from a screen reader point of view. Is there anything that you saw recently that Microsoft has done that you thought, wow, like we've really upped the game here from an accessibility point of view?
I've got one, if I may.
Yeah,
and it's a very, very recent thing, really. And it's very easy to overlook. Custom backgrounds. So having those backgrounds now rolling out in Microsoft Teams, I know a lot of people have a lot of fun with it, and I really personally enjoy that. It kind of strips out somebody's accidental home office, which is actually their bedroom. So less embarrassing, more comfortable for everyone that's viewing that. But here's the thing. With some of those background settings now, even if you are putting in your own, which it is possible currently, and I'm sure many people will find their way how to do that. But with that, it helps. I have heard from a number of people, it helps with visual impairment then, because I can concentrate on the person, not all the objects around them. So if I didn't have my accessibility wallpaper behind me, which hopefully you can see there, everyone's welcome, cool. Open to all. Yeah, the reality is it's a white wall behind me with a very long orange radiator, and that may play havoc to some people's sight. I'm hoping that the blue doesn't. But here's the thing. With those custom backgrounds, it's a very unexpected benefit to some people with visual impairment, because now they concentrate on you and not all the noise that's gone on around you.
I love it.
Obviously, I keep going back to hearing quite a bit because that's my day-to-day struggle. So the other thing as well that I think about this is custom backgrounds. For me, I don't have a visual impairment, it's all the hearing, but with the camera on, if I can't hear the person because maybe they're using substandard audiovisual stuff for picking up the mic and so on, I rely a lot on lip reading. And so because the backgrounds are now being used by more people and they're more comfortable to put the cameras on, I mean, Jared Spataro shared that stat only a few days ago saying there's been a big uptake in people actually switching those cameras on. That's great news for me because I will lip read you if I can't get the words out, or if I forgot to, if I was a clever boy, I'd switch on the auto captions, which of course now available to me. But that all depends if I'm a guest and somebody else's tenant and so on.
I totally agree with you. I think now because of the global pandemic, turning on your webcam for video conference calls is so much more the norm. But there is this kind of like hidden accessibility needs. There's also hidden accessibility benefits. We didn't even realize that it would actually be so much more inclusive to many people who we work with, who we converse with, if we just did one simple thing, just to turn one feature on.
Anna, you must have a story of seeing people with accessibility issues that you didn't realize before and how you've been able to help them.
Yeah, I have. And maybe it's very specific to the Microsoft tech community. We are definitely on a journey when it comes to making our community a lot more inclusive for people of all different needs. Just a simple thing with contrast issues. We've certainly learned that, just like Bill mentioned earlier, that certain grays on grays just do not work. And we're still working on a lot of those things. But I've personally learned a lot about developing for accessibility needs over this course of time. Simple things like, font size and other color issues, visual indicators for keyboard navigation. We're working on that right now. Tab ordering is too, so it's easier for people to use keyboards to actually go through different menu options. Even ARIA tags for screen readers is something that I had no idea about, but we've still got a lot of things that we need to do on the site that I want our listeners to be aware of. We are still trying to work on the physical structure of the page so it's much more compliant with screen readers. Our icons, they sometimes aren't correctly announced by the screen readers too. So, a lot of people love to use icons, kind of similar to the icons you got in your background, Andy. But
yeah, sure.
We need to make sure that we have the right annotations so people understand what we are trying to convey. And it speaks to an earlier point about intent. When you're thinking about that alt text for an image, don't just say, oh, it's a bunch of people. What are these people doing? Are they talking to each other? Where are they? Give them the context so they can understand what you're trying to convey. There's a whole adage about, hey, a picture speaks 1,000 words, but if you don't put the words there, people won't understand what you're trying to say if they can't see it.
It needs to be a lot less than 1,000 words as well to be useful as an alt text.
Yes.
So if you can't express it in a few words, perhaps you don't need the image. It's just there decoratively, but you can say something about that that is just a decorative image and convey that in the alt text. There's a feature in the new theme engine that's part of the Office UI fabric, or it's probably changing name now, where they will actually warn you when you do the color picker. It'll warn you if you've got low contrast between the text on the button and the background and things like that. So these are all good things, good tools that are making it easier to get it right and more difficult to get it wrong. And that's a good thing. And that's just built right in.
The fluent design.
Fluent, yeah.
Yeah, and I really wanted to bring to everybody's attention a really great blog post that Bill did that is, you say it's high level, but I think it's actually quite detailed in terms of all the different considerations that people should be making when it comes to accessibility. You talk about so many different elements. Do you want to just give us a brief overview, Bill?
It's just really a checklist of some of the top level things that you need for various different accessibility requirements, which are around anxiety, autistic spectrum. I've got a list of them here, otherwise I couldn't remember them all. Deaf or hard of hearing, dyslexia, low vision, physical and motor disabilities, and screen reader, people using screen readers, which is another vision aspect of it. And as you go through those, and this is from the UK Home Office accessibility posters, which are excellent, and I think you're going to link those in the show notes for people.
Yes.
As you go through the list of those requirements, you look at them and you say, yeah, I can see why you would need that accessibility feature if you had that particular impairment. But then you look at them again and you think, well, actually, why would you make a page for people with anxiety or dyslexia? Don't make the layout confusing and the text confusing. Why would you do that anyway? And that's really the point.
Right.
It just equates to bad design anyway. So there's no reason not to get this right. Just aligns almost perfectly with things that we should be doing anyway. And there's a spectrum of needs, and almost everybody's got some kind of accessibility need, so it just doesn't really make sense.
So you talked about some things I haven't really considered before, because I'm very selfish just thinking about myself here. No, of course not, but hearing is the thing I keep going to, yeah? But also I work quite closely with visually impaired people. It's very easy to not be aware of all the other different types of accessibility issues, and anxiety is one that I hear sometimes, and then it somehow drops off the radar, and that's completely my bad. But one of the things I just thought of off the back of here is we talked about how do we bake this in. So baking it in, as a continual improvement thing from exec level down to champion level down to a development phase. But one of the things also I thought that could really add value here is if you incorporate this type of design into people that are in charge of communications. Because it's very easy for us to put together a look good, accessible type of SharePoint page. So that's great when you know what you're looking for. If you're someone in a communications department, very typically that's something that comes out of marketing. It might be easy to overlook that those guys could probably do with that training and awareness as well, and then showing them what the tools will allow them to do to aid them with that.
Yep, and an example of that would be the sort of the corporate business speak that people sometimes slip into is unhelpful for people who are, have some of these conditions, dyslexia, for example, just using long-winded words completely unnecessarily when we all, we know they actually trying to conveys some fairly simple concept, but it doesn't sound complicated or technical enough, and so they dress it up in all this flowery language that adds nothing.
Sure.
There's a really great feature in Word that actually is all about conciseness of language.
Yeah.
If you use the latest version of Word, you'll start typing a few words in a sentence, and then it'll give you a little double blue line underneath it saying, hey, maybe you might want to take these words out and just make this sentence a little bit more concise.
Yeah,
so
and
I love that.
And that's great. And nobody's trying to stifle creativity.
No.
It's not the same thing. It's just using words in an unnecessarily complicated way without adding in any quality, and just making it more obscure and difficult to follow, and giving people problems. Just bad design again.
Exactly.
Couldn't agree more. One of the things I'll just add here is, as we talked about, there are loads of current and new features that help and aid the story of accessibility. It's only as good as keeping up to date with your technology, of course. So a common thing that I see as an organization will say, I'm using Windows 10. And when you look under the hood, you're like, oh, you're using Anniversary Edition or Creators Fall Edition, and yet somebody else in the organization is using the latest build. And there's a disparity between the accessibility options. So if you look after the tech side of that, it's really worth looking at where your build versions are for your Office apps, your Office 365 apps, and also your Windows 10 build as well, to make sure that you're getting the best out of those latest accessibility options, and that you have a unified story if you start to educate the options that are available to them, if they really aren't available to all people.
That's awesome. And you're yourself, Andy, a Windows Insider MVP, so you've got a little bit of an inside scoop on some of the things that are happening on the latest build of Windows too.
Well, the thing is, it's not secret. anyone can see that.
Yeah.
And that's what's quite nice. And here's the thing: anyone can leverage the Windows Insider preview program. It also exists for Office Insider, and also if you guys are following OneNote, there's an Insider program for that. And accessibility, yeah, it definitely plays a part. Now, if you're a business user, my quick thing on here is you can sign up to the Windows 10 Insider program as well, or Windows Insider program for business, and you will see the feedback going to Microsoft as well as yourself. So you can capture if there's some accessibility feedback in there.
Perfect. So I wanted to recognize that coming up there is a very momentous occasion. It will be International Accessibility Day on May 21st. So I was wondering if either of you could, put forward some sort of accessibility challenge to our listeners, something that either they could do when it comes to developing any website or documentation, even a PowerPoint presentation, anything that they might be able to do to make their work a little bit more inclusive.
Got to say, those home office guidelines are very good, and it's short as well. It's a very quick read, and it's just a checklist, and just keep going back to that checklist and seeing how you can improve. And just as Andy says, just continually improve what you're doing, revisit stuff, make it better. And it's not difficult, and the technology can be a great leveler, which we can bring everybody up to the same level, and nobody needs to be disadvantaged.
Sure. For me, my challenge really is if you're part of an organization, look inwards into that organization and see, can I play a part in the accessibility story here? Is there something at the moment? If there isn't, you don't have to be a techie. In fact, there are many people who aren't techies because it isn't technical information to find out, the options that are available to you. Microsoft.com/accessibility is going to be a great starting point. And then perhaps raise your hand. In fact, I solemnly encourage you, raise your hand and say, I'm willing to help here on accessibility, whether you have an accessible issue or not. You're surely going to know someone who is, and you're going to really help to benefit people.
Those are some really great tips. And also, I want to make sure that people are aware of the Microsoft Accessibility team. There's a fully staffed org that is completely focused on accessibility needs across all our product development teams all around the world. And they have a Twitter handle. If you want to follow them, it's at MSFTenable. And you can find a lot of their great resources, and I'm sure they'll be doing something really fun on the 21st coming up. So
I wouldn't be surprised if they put things also on blogs.microsoft.com/accessibility.
So they do have a blog series as well.
Bill, if people wanted to find you, what would be the best way for them to get in touch?
But I've got a blog site on www.spdoctor.com. And my Twitter handle is spdoctor if people want to follow or see what I'm up to.
Perfect. And Andy, how can people find you?
I generally discourage people from trying to find me, but for professional reasons, you can find me on Twitter at SharePointAndy. Definitely has nothing to do with my day job. Or also the usual channels like LinkedIn.
Okay, so thank you so much, Andy and Bill, for our great conversations today. We could have talked for hours about everything accessibility, and I've certainly learnt a lot from both of you. I highly encourage our listeners to take a look at all of the great resources that they mentioned and follow them on Twitter. They've got a lot of fun and exciting and very helpful resources to share on an ongoing basis. But also make sure that you check out the Microsoft Tech community. As I mentioned, we are doing a lot of work on an accessibility front. So please bear witness to some of the great things that we've got coming up soon. But it is an ongoing thing. We are very committed to accessibility amongst many other things, including keeping you connected to the wider community in these unprecedented times. So check it out, techcommunity.microsoft.com. You can also find many events happening around the world virtually now. So please take a look there under community events. You can also discover Microsoft learning paths, blogs, and event recaps. Check out techcommunity.microsoft.com there. If you'd like to reach out, share your favorite community story, have any suggestions on who you'd like to see on the show, please reach out to us. You can follow me on Twitter at @_AChew. We've also got a Twitter handle for The Uptake. It is @TheUptakePod, POD. Subscribe to the show. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoyed The Uptake, please share it with your friends, your colleagues, and your community. Help us spread the word and the community love. On behalf of the Microsoft Tech community, I'd like to thank you for spending time with us today. I'm Anna Chu, and I'll see you next time.